Yo, when Eazy-E warned about his enemies plotting against him, he had no idea he was foreshadowing his own death.
Suge tried to destroy my record company with the help of others, Dre.
2 years later, he was gone, and now rare hospital footage has just surfaced, showing Eazy-E's final moments and hinting at the conspiracy that ended his life. Let me break it down. The last moments that shook hip-hop. Picture this, March 1995, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The most feared man in hip-hop, Eric Eazy-E Wright, is laying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, fighting what would be his last battle. But according to the homies who were there, something about this whole situation just didn't add up. The rapid decline, the mysterious circumstances, the timing, it all pointed to something much more sinister than what the mainstream media was feeding us.
So I go in, I grab his hand, and I'm talking to him. You know, he ain't responding, but I feel his hand. He was not supposed to move. His hand ain't supposed to move, but I feel him like he knew I was there, that he might be able to hear me. And then when I went out, that's when I found out he was in an induced coma. I'm like, I'm up here talking to him, and I'm like, what? You know, I'm just like, wow. It's crazy to see one of your best friends, you know, dying or, you know, in a bad shape.
Now check this out. DJ Yella, one of Eazy's closest soldiers from the NWA days, was spitting some real truth about what went down in that room. This cat rolled up to the hospital thinking he could chop it up with his homie one last time, not knowing that E was already in an induced coma. But here's where it gets real spooky. Yella felt Eazy's hand move, felt him responding even though the doctor said that wasn't supposed to happen. That's some supernatural connection right there. Almost like E was trying to communicate something important from beyond the medical machinery keeping him alive. But the chilling reality becomes even more apparent when you hear how Eazy reached out to his people in those final weeks.
I was at his house shooting in Norwalk, and he called me, and I'm like, what is he calling me for? He bugging me on my set. I had to stop shooting, and he called me and said, hey, watch yourself. Huh? You know, I don't remember nothing else but watch yourself. He said that twice. And I didn't know what he was talking about till later when I found out what he had.
That warning hit different when you realize what was about to happen. E was trying to tell his closest friends something was coming, but he couldn't or wouldn't say what.
He talking about watch the girls, you know, because I was shooting girls and, you know, there's, you know, benefits with it sometimes. So he was telling me, watch the girl, because he never wanted me to know he had AIDS. He never told me. He didn't want, I didn't get to go to the hospital, nothing at all.
But here's what really gets deep. E didn't want his closest friends to even know what was happening to him. He was trying to protect them from whatever was going down, keeping them away from the hospital. That's either a man trying to spare his homies from seeing him in a vulnerable state, or someone who knew the danger was real and didn't want his people caught up in it. The street's been talking about how Eazy went from looking regular to being on his deathbed in a matter of weeks. According to Lazy Bone from Bone Thugs and Harmony, who saw Eazy during the Faux the Love of Dollar video shoot, E was coughing but appearing normal.
This was 2 weeks before Cedars-Sinai.
Okay,
he went in for bronchitis or whatever. I think it was some kind of breathing. That's what he went in that hospital for. That's where he called me from the little hospital. And then I guess 2 weeks later, he went to Cedars-Sinai.
So E went from making warning calls from some smaller hospital to being at Cedars-Sinai in full-blown AIDS in just 2 weeks.
But by the time he got to Cedars-Sinai, it might have been I don't know, full-blown or something.
Right, because you went to go see him, he was already in a coma.
That timeline don't add up for nobody who understands how AIDS progression typically works. But hold up, let's keep it 100 about the elephant in the room. The conspiracy theories that been floating around the hood for decades got some serious weight behind them when you really break down the timeline and listen to what the people who were actually there are saying. We talking about a man who went from running his empire to being diagnosed with AIDS to being dead, all in the span of 1 month. That's not just unlikely, that's damn near impossible according to the medical knowledge we had back then. Dr. Dre, despite all the beef and bad blood between them cats, made his way to that hospital room for one final moment with his former partner.
Really though?
Yeah, so the last time I actually saw him, he didn't know I was in the room. He was on life support, you know? So I just reached down and whispered a few words in his ear, and I think maybe the next day or two, he passed away.
But you guys had a chance to just talk as brothers.
Now that's some heavy stuff right there. Dre admitting that he whispered in E's ear while he was unconscious, trying to make peace after years of throwing shots at each other through diss tracks. But what really gets me is how Dre described it. He didn't know I was in the room. That suggests E was in a deep state, possibly that induced coma that Yella was talking about.
They was trying to do a surgery to clear his lungs or whatever it is. And they knew whatever it was, 50-50 chance that he can knock him out of it. So they put him in a coma. He wasn't in a coma, they induced the coma.
So the doctors knew there was only a 50 chance E would survive the surgery, and they had to put him in an induced coma to even attempt it. That's how critical his condition had become in such a short time frame. But here's where the plot thickens, and the conspiracy gets real thick. The streets been buzzing about Suge Knight's involvement in Eazy's death for years, and when you listen to what the big homie himself said, it's enough to make your skin crawl.
Right. Technology is so high, right?
Right.
So if you shoot somebody, you go to jail forever. So the kids, you don't want to go to jail forever, right? So they got this new thing out there. People sell them all the time. They got this stuff they call, they get blood from somebody with AIDS, and then they shoot you with it.
Oh, so that seems bad.
That's a slow death.
Yeah.
An Eazy-E thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, no.
Now tell me that don't sound like a confession wrapped in a hypothetical situation. Suge basically laid out the blueprint for how someone could eliminate their enemies without getting caught up in a murder rap. And when you consider the beef between Death Row and Ruthless Records, the timing of this statement, and the way Eazy went out, the pieces start fitting together like a deadly puzzle. The tension between Suge and Eazy was deeper than just business. It was personal. According to unseen footage from 1993, Eazy was heated about Suge trying to destroy his record company.
Suge tried to destroy my record company with the help of others, Dre. So right now we're getting everything back together and we finna come out, fully loaded.
When your manager has to talk you out of murdering your rival, that's when you know the situation has gone way beyond music business disputes. This was life and death hatred, and both sides knew it. Think about the timeline for a minute. Eazy got that mysterious phone call warning him to watch yourself just 2 weeks before he ended up at Cedars-Sinai. DJ Yella remembered how E called him while he was shooting his adult film, telling him to watch himself twice. But at the time, Yella didn't understand what his homie was trying to tell him. It wasn't until after E's diagnosis that it all made sense. E was trying to warn his closest friends about the dangers lurking in the shadows. The medical community and the mainstream media want us to believe that Eazy contracted HIV through his promiscuous lifestyle, pointing to his admission about having multiple unprotected partners. But when you really examine the evidence and listen to the people who knew him best, a different picture emerges. This was a man who was paranoid about his security, who knew he had enemies, and who was trying to warn his friends about something sinister. The most chilling revelation comes from Tamika Wright, the woman who became Eazy's wife just days before his death. Her testimony about receiving that devastating phone call shows the raw emotion and shock that nobody was prepared for.
And I got a call from the doctor. Well, really, I got a call from him, but then he was on the phone crying and couldn't talk. And then the doctor got on the phone, asked me, was I sitting down? And then he told me, we got the test results back, and the test results came back positive. He is HIV positive.
The pain in Tamika's voice when she recounted that phone call tells you everything you need to know about how devastating this news was. But what's really telling is how she described E's reaction. He was crying and couldn't talk. This wasn't a man who was prepared for this diagnosis. This was someone who was genuinely shocked and terrified by what he was hearing.
The doctor said Eazy was in the final stages of full-blown AIDS.
He just kept apologizing, because at that time, the only ones that knew I was pregnant was he and I. We got married at the hospital because he wasn't sure if he was going to make it through. He went through the whole list of, who to trust, who not to trust, who to look out for, who not to look out for, apologizing for whatever negative things that he brought onto my life.
Now that's some real street knowledge right there. E wasn't just thinking about his own mortality. He was trying to school his wife on the game, telling her who could be trusted and who was suspect. That's a man who knew the dangers were real and wanted to make sure his family was protected after he was gone. The fact that he felt the need to warn her about specific people tells you everything about the paranoia and legitimate threats that surrounded his empire. When the news finally broke to the public, it sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community and beyond.
Rap singer Eazy-E has lost his battle with AIDS just 10 days after revealing that he had the disease. The 31-year-old rapper died last night in a Los Angeles hospital. He was hospitalized last month for what he thought was asthma and said that he did not know how he contracted AIDS. Eazy-E, whose real name was Eric Wright, was a founding member of the band NWA.
That news report highlighted the key point that had everyone's head spinning. E went in thinking he had asthma and came out with an AIDS diagnosis. And notice how they mentioned he said he didn't know how he contracted it. For a man who had been open about his lifestyle in interviews and songs, that statement of not knowing showing how he got infected raises serious questions about what really went down when you add up all the testimonies from cats who were actually there. DJ Yella feeling E's hand move in that coma, Dr. Dre whispering final words to an unconscious legend, Tomika getting that devastating phone call, and the cryptic warnings E gave just weeks before. The picture becomes clear. The rapid timeline, the suspicious circumstances, and Suge Knight's own words about using AIDS as a weapon all point to something much darker than the official story. The godfather of gangster rap wasn't just another casualty of risky living. This was the most sophisticated assassination plot hip-hop has ever seen, carried out by people who knew exactly how to eliminate their enemies without leaving traditional evidence behind. The funeral that exposed hip-hop's hypocrites. After Eazy-E's death shook the hip-hop world to its core on March 26, 1995, the streets started buzzing with anticipation about how the culture would pay its respects to the godfather of gangster rap. But what went down at his funeral on April 7, 1995, at the First African Methodist Episcopal Church in Los Angeles, exposed some cold truths about loyalty, respect, and the fake love that runs deep in the music industry. The turnout, and more importantly, who didn't show up, told a story that's been whispered about in barbershops and recording studios for 3 decades. Over 3,000 people packed the church and overflowed onto the streets, creating a scene that looked more like a homegoing for a head of state than a rapper's funeral. You had gang members in full color standing next to suburban moms with their kids, industry executives in expensive suits next to cats from the hood wearing their best gear. The diversity of that crowd showed you just how far E's influence reached, from the streets of Compton to the boardrooms of Hollywood. But here's what really had the streets talking: the glaring absence of most of his NWA brothers. Ice Cube didn't show. Dr. Dre was nowhere to be found. MC Ren stayed away. DJ Yella was the only NWA member who stepped up as a pallbearer, carrying his homie's gold casket, while the others who helped build that empire were conspicuously missing in action. Now, these cats had their reasons, or at least that's what they wanted us to believe. Ice Cube later claimed he couldn't face seeing E in that state, saying it would be too emotional. Dr. Dre gave similar excuses about not being able to handle the grief. MC Ren said he couldn't bear to see his former partner that way, but the hood wasn't buying those explanations, especially when you consider that these same cats had been throwing shots at E in diss tracks just years before. The optics were terrible, and the culture noticed. Here you had the man who put West Coast hip-hop on the map, who gave these dudes their careers and made them millionaires, laying in a gold casket, and his former partners couldn't even show up to pay their respects. That's some cold-blooded disrespect that the streets don't forget or forgive easily.
Did you cry at that point?
Oh yeah, I mean, I cried in the room, not as much, you try to be tough, but
Yeah.
because I remember Dre had came just 2 hours before me, and I just like, wow, it was crazy. It was just weird.
Yella kept it 100 about the emotions and the weird energy surrounding E's final moments. Even he admitted that Dre had come through the hospital just hours before him, which makes Dre's absence from the funeral even more suspect. You visit your homie on his deathbed but can't show up to see him off properly? That don't sit right with nobody who understands street code and loyalty. The funeral itself was a spectacle that showed both the love and the contradictions in hip-hop culture. Reverend Cecil Murray delivered a eulogy that praised Eazy-E's anti-gang efforts while warning the youth about AIDS, telling the packed church, "Be careful, this disease is real." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a preacher trying to turn E's death into a teachable moment about safe sex and responsible living, when the streets were buzzing with conspiracy theories about foul play. Compton Mayor Omar Bradley read a proclamation declaring Eazy-E Day, officially recognizing E's role in putting Compton on the global map. That was some real recognition from the city that raised him, acknowledging that despite all the controversy and explicit lyrics, E had become an ambassador for his community in a way that nobody could have predicted. The burial at Rose Hills Memorial Park in Whittier became another statement about E's status and influence. They laid him to rest in a gold casket, the same flashy style that defined his persona throughout his career. He was dressed casually in a flannel shirt, jeans, and a Compton hat, staying true to his street roots even in death. That image of him in that gold casket became iconic, representing the fusion of street authenticity and commercial success that defined the golden era of West Coast rap. But while the public was mourning, behind the scenes there was already drama brewing over E's empire. Disputes over Ruthless Records were adding tension to an already emotional situation, with E's widow Tomika Woods battling former director Mike Klein in court over control of the label. The vultures were already circling before the man was even cold in the ground, trying to get their piece of the empire he built. The reactions from the hip-hop community in the days and weeks following the funeral revealed the complex relationships and unresolved beefs that defined that era. Ice Cube admitted that when he visited E in the hospital, they discussed reuniting NWA, but he also confessed that he didn't shed tears when E died because he was aware of his risky lifestyle. That's some cold perspective right there, acknowledging the loss while also placing blame on the victim for his own demise. Dr. Dre got emotional during the filming of Straight Outta Compton years later, particularly during scenes depicting E's death, saying it was almost the other way around. I could have been the one in that position. But where was that emotion during the funeral? Where was that regret when his homie needed support the most? Snoop Dogg, who had been caught up in the Death Row Ruthless beef, later admitted that he regularly bumped E's diss track Real G's despite being on the opposite side of the conflict. That level of respect for E's lyrical skills, even from his enemies, showed just how talented and influential he really was. The conspiracy theories that had been brewing since E's diagnosis reached a fever pitch after the funeral. Bone Thugs and Harmony, who were probably the closest to E in his final years, openly voiced doubts about the AIDS diagnosis, with members like Busy Bone saying, "Something doesn't add up." These weren't random internet trolls spreading rumors. These were artists who had direct access to E and intimate knowledge of his health and lifestyle. The group's 1996 tribute, The Crossroads, became a massive hit, winning a Grammy and selling millions of copies while keeping E's memory alive in the culture. But even that success was tinged with the pain of losing their mentor and the suspicion that his death wasn't natural. The lyrics of that song carried weight because they came from cats who had real love for E and genuine grief about losing him. King T, another West Coast peer, echoed the conspiracy sentiments in recent interviews, claiming that E didn't die from AIDS. When veterans of the scene who knew E personally are still questioning the official story 3 decades later, that tells you something about how deep the suspicion runs in the culture. The funeral also highlighted the generational and geographical divides in hip-hop. You had older cats from the community showing genuine love and respect, while some of the younger industry players seemed more concerned with protecting their own interests and avoiding any association with controversy. The absence of key figures sent a message that loyalty has limits when careers and reputations are at stake. Even E's own family got caught up in the drama. His daughter E.B. Wright has been investigating his death for years, funding documentaries and crowdfunding efforts to uncover the truth about what happened to her father. The fact that his own children don't believe the official story should tell you everything you need to know about how suspicious the circumstances really were. The 2021 Wet V docuseries, The Mysterious Death of Eazy-E, brought renewed attention to the conspiracy theories, with E.B. and other family members tracking down eyewitnesses and investigating the timeline of events. While they didn't find conclusive proof of murder, they raised enough questions to keep the controversy alive in the public consciousness. The funeral ultimately became a symbol of everything that was wrong with hip-hop loyalty and brotherhood during that era. It showed how quickly love can turn to indifference, how beef can overshadow respect, and how the culture can abandon its pioneers when it becomes convenient. The fact that DJ Yella was the only NWA member to step up as a pallbearer says everything about who had real love for E and who was just riding the wave when it was profitable. The legacy that hip-hop can't escape. 30 years after Eazy-E's death, the ripple effects of his life, his contributions to hip-hop culture, and the circumstances surrounding his passing continue to shape conversations in barbershops, recording studios, and social media feeds across the globe. The man who dubbed himself the godfather of gangsta rap left behind a legacy so complex and influential that the culture is still trying to fully understand and appreciate what he accomplished during his brief but explosive career. Let's be real about what E brought to the table. Before NWA dropped Straight Outta Compton in 1988, nobody was talking about police brutality, street life, and systemic racism with the raw, unfiltered honesty that defined gangsta rap. E wasn't just making music, he was documenting the harsh realities of growing up black in America. During the crack epidemic and the rise of mass incarceration, songs like That Police weren't just controversial tracks designed to shock white suburbia. They were protest anthems that gave voice to communities that had been ignored and oppressed for decades. The business model that E pioneered with Ruthless Records became the blueprint for independent hip-hop entrepreneurship. Starting with drug money and building it into a multi-million-dollar empire showed other artists that they didn't need major label backing to achieve success and maintain creative control. Cats like Master P, Jay-Z, and even Dr. Dre's later business ventures with Beats took pages directly from E's playbook about owning your masters and building your own distribution networks. But E's influence goes deeper than just business and music. He fundamentally changed how the world viewed Compton and South Central Los Angeles. Before NWA, most people had never heard of Compton, and if they had, it was probably only in the context of crime statistics or negative news coverage. E took his community struggles and turned them into a global phenomenon, making Compton synonymous with authentic street culture and uncompromising artistic expression. The feud legacy that emerged from NWA NWA's breakup essentially created the template for hip-hop beef culture that we still see today. The back and forth between E and Ice Cube, then E and Dr. Dre, established the art of the diss track as a legitimate form of musical expression. No Vaseline and Real Motherfucking G's are still studied by rap fans and artists as masterclasses in lyrical warfare, showing how personal animosity can create some of the most memorable and impactful music in hip-hop history. But the conspiracy theories surrounding E's death have created a parallel legacy that's equally influential. The persistent allegations about Suge Knight's involvement, the suspicious timing of his illness, and the rapid progression of his AIDS diagnosis have made E's death a cautionary tale about the dangers of success in the music industry. Whether you believe the conspiracies or not, they've become part of hip-hop folklore, warning artists about the price of crossing the wrong people or getting too powerful too fast. Suge Knight's own words about using AIDS as a weapon continue to fuel speculation and debate in the culture. When someone with Knight's reputation and history makes statements about eliminating enemies through biological warfare, the streets listen and remember. That quote has been dissected, analyzed, and debated for over 2 decades, becoming a key piece of evidence for those who believe E was murdered. The impact on AIDS awareness in the black community can't be overlooked either. E's public announcement about his diagnosis and his plea for safe sex education came at a time when HIV/AIDS was still heavily stigmatized, especially in communities of color. His willingness to speak openly about his condition, even in his final days, helped break down some of the shame and silence that surrounded the disease. But that same openness also provided ammunition for those who wanted to blame E for his own death. The mainstream narrative focused on his admitted promiscuous lifestyle and risky behavior, using his own words against him to deflect attention from the suspicious circumstances and timeline of his illness. This victim-blaming approach became a cautionary tale for other artists about how their personal lives could be weaponized against them in death. The influence on West Coast rap culture specifically cannot be overstated. E's discovery and mentorship of Bone Thugs and Harmony showed his ear for talent and his ability to nurture artists who didn't fit the traditional gangsta rap mold. Their tribute, Thy Crossroads, became one of the biggest hits of the 1990s, proving that E's influence extended beyond his own recordings to the artists he championed and developed. The 2015 biopic Straight Outta Compton introduced E's story to a new generation, but it also sparked fresh controversy about how his legacy was being portrayed. Some criticized the film for sanitizing the group's more problematic lyrics and attitudes, while others felt it didn't adequately address the conspiracy theories surrounding E's death. The movie's massive commercial success proved that there was still tremendous interest in E's story, but it also showed how difficult it is to capture the full complexity of his legacy in a mainstream Hollywood production. The digital age has given new life to E's conspiracy theories and legacy discussions. Social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok regularly feature debates about his death, with new generations discovering the suspicious circumstances and drawing their own conclusions. Recent posts and discussions continue to question the official narrative, keeping the controversy alive and relevant for younger audiences who weren't alive during E's heyday. The ongoing legal battles over his estate and the control of Ruthless Records have also kept his name in the headlines. His children, particularly daughter E.B. Wright, have continued to fight for control of their father's legacy and business interests, often clashing with stepmother Tamika Woods Wright over creative and financial decisions. The influence on modern rap beef culture is undeniable. Every time rappers engage in lyrical warfare today, they're following patterns established during the NWA feuds, the personal attacks, the questioning of street credibility, the involvement of associates and family members. All of these elements can be traced back to the battles between E, Cube, and Dre in the early 1990s. But perhaps E's most lasting legacy is how he proved that authenticity and commercial success don't have to be mutually exclusive. His ability to maintain street credibility while achieving mainstream success showed other artists that they didn't have to compromise their message or change their style to reach wider audiences. This lesson continues to influence how artists approach their careers and their relationship with both the streets and the industry. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.